Out in the open, miles from shore, a wild bobcat fought to keep its chin above the icy water, its claws raking water that offered no grip. Drenched and exhausted, the bobcat battled the freezing depths, eyes wide, paws churning, time running out. When the Hereford family set out on what they thought would be an ordinary fishing trip, just as the morning sun began to cut through the mist, they spotted something strange. At first, they thought it was a log. But as they drifted closer, they realized their mistake. It was an exhausted, panicked bobcat miles from the nearest shore. How did a bobcat end up in open water? What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a story you have to see to believe. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the Rockies when the Hereford family eased their aluminum boat onto the cold, glassy waters of Flathead Lake. A thin mist clung to the lake like a ghostly scarf, casting an ethereal glow over the sprawling water. Pine trees stood like silent sentries guarding the shoreline, their reflections painted on the mirror surface. The family had chosen to start their fishing adventure early, partly to beat the crowds and partly because Bob Hereford insisted that fish only bite before the sun has a chance to fully wake up. He said it every time they went out, even though Brett, his adult son, suspected his father just liked an excuse to watch the sunrise. Bob cradled a steaming thermos of coffee between his weathered hands, savoring the warmth while casting a half-smile at the sleepy crew. His wife, Bobby, bundled in layers and sporting a wool cap that puffed up like a marshmallow, clutched a container of homemade muffins. Brett, in his late 20s with a tan line that betrayed a life spent outdoors, busied himself with organizing the tackle box, humming an old country tune. The boat bobbed gently as Brett untangled a mass of fishing line that seemed determined to remain in knots. Bob grumbled good-naturedly about the importance of proper equipment maintenance, to which Bobby responded by offering him a muffin, effectively silencing him with blueberry crumbs. The day promised fish stories, and none of them imagined how wild it would become. As they motored away from the dock, Bob regaled the family with a tale about the time he allegedly hooked a legendary trout the size of a small child. According to him, the fish had pulled so hard that it nearly dragged his boat clear across the lake until, as all big fish stories go, the line snapped, leaving him with only the ghost of the monster fish and a convenient excuse for why they had come home empty-handed. Brett rolled his eyes but smiled, having heard the story enough times to mouth the dramatic pauses. Bobby chimed in with playful skepticism, suggesting that the mythical fish might just be the same one Bob had described as stealing his lunch the last time they came out. Even the boat seemed to creak in amusement. Bob responded with a mock salute and promised to provide photographic evidence when he finally reeled it in. Their voices carried across the still water, mixing with the cries of distant loons and the faint hum of other boats revving up for a day of angling. The warmth of the banter cut through the crispness of the morning air. Hidden beneath the humor was a deep respect for the lake and its inhabitants. Both father and son knew these waters held secrets that only patience and luck could coax to the surface. In between jokes, Bob reminded Brett to keep an eye out for submerged logs, a tip that would prove to be more prophetic than he realized. The boat's motor droned at a comfortable pace, pushing them toward their favorite fishing spot near a rocky outcropping where trout liked to linger. Bobby poured coffee into tin mugs, and Brett adjusted their course, scanning the water for ripples that might betray the presence of fish. The conversation shifted to Brett's latest project at work, then to a neighbor's new puppy that apparently had a taste for garden hoses, and then to the proper way to season cast iron skillets. It was typical Hereford chatter, meandering, punctuated with laughter and spiced with the occasional pun. Bob sighed theatrically about how the lake used to be less crowded, then pointed at an empty expanse of water as if to prove his point. Bobby teased him about his selective memory, noting that he once got lost on this very lake because he refused to ask for directions from a teenager in a jet ski. Brett snorted and nearly spilled his coffee. Time seemed elastic. Minutes stretched and contracted with the sway of the boat. The peaceful monotony of the morning made what happened next feel even more surreal. A dark shape appeared far ahead on the water's surface, bobbing irregularly like a piece of driftwood caught in an unseen current. Bob squinted, then shielded his eyes with his hand. "Log ahead," he declared with the authority of someone who misidentified weather balloons as UFOs. Brett steered slightly to avoid it, but as they drew closer, the shape moved against the current, sending ripples of surprise through the boat. At first, none of them could quite process what they were seeing. The lump that Bob had dismissed as a log suddenly sprouted what looked unmistakably like ears. Pointed, tufted ears. The Hereford's initial confusion turned to disbelief and then to alarm as the creature's head lifted slightly before slipping back beneath the surface. Brett instinctively cut the motor, and the boat coasted silently closer. The trio leaned over the side, eyes wide and breath held. Floating in the frigid expanse was a bobcat, its mottled fur plastered to its slender body, paws working furiously to stay above water. In general, cats have a reputation for disliking baths, and this one clearly had not chosen to go for a swim. Its eyes flicked toward the approaching boat, wild and exhausted, pupils dilated with fear. For a moment, there was only the sound of water lapping against aluminum and the distant call of gulls. Bob was the first to break the spell. "Well, that's the strangest rainbow trout I've ever seen," he murmured. Bobby elbowed him, but even she couldn't stifle a nervous laugh. Brett's mind raced. They were miles from shore, and here was a predator built for stalking through underbrush fighting to keep its head above water. A quick calculation told him that the animal wouldn't last much longer on its own. The lake may have been calm, but the chill and distance spelled doom for a creature whose swimming technique could generously be described as panicked dog paddle. Leaving it to its fate was not an option. Rescuing a wild bobcat was not on anyone's list of things to do that day, and yet the Herefords found themselves searching for a plan. Thoughts of claws and teeth flashed through Brett's head like caution signs in a cartoon. Bob, who had once prided himself on being resourceful enough to change a boat propeller with nothing but chewing gum and a screwdriver, scanned their gear for something that could double as a lifeline. The fishing net lay across the middle seat, its mesh wide enough to scoop up fish but strong enough, he hoped, to lift a heavier animal. Bobby, always the voice of practicality, reminded them that wild animals, especially cornered ones, could lash out. Brett nodded, though his eyes never left the struggling bobcat. Fear and empathy tangled in his stomach. The animal's ears were now slicked back against its head, and its movements had slowed. Humor helped break the tension. Bob quipped that they were about to catch the rare and elusive Flathead Lake catfish, earning himself another elbow. But beneath the jokes lay a shared resolve. Brett gripped the handle of the net like a knight hefting a lance, determined but not entirely sure of what he was doing. As they drew alongside the bobcat, Bob eased the boat so gently that barely a ripple disturbed the creature. It still tried to paddle away, but exhaustion had turned its limbs to lead. Its chin dipped dangerously low in the water. Brett held his breath and plunged the net underneath the animal in one smooth motion, praying the mesh wouldn't tear under the weight of panic. The moment the bobcat felt the net beneath it, its instincts flared. Claws shot out, gripping the nylon threads, its hind legs scrabbling for purchase. Water cascaded off its body as Brett hoisted the net upward with all the strength he could muster. For a split second, the bobcat hung suspended between lake and boat like some mythical creature rising from a watery underworld. Then gravity took hold, and it dropped onto the deck in a sodden heap, tangled in the net and coughing up lake water. The Herefords all took an involuntary step back. The cabin suddenly seemed much smaller now that it contained an animal that, under different circumstances, might have viewed them as the main course. The bobcat looked diminutive compared to the legends of mountain lions and wolves that circulated through Montana taverns. But its compact muscles, gleaming eyes, and needle-sharp claws commanded respect. Bobby whispered an expletive she would later deny. Brett kept a firm grip on the net, ready to wrestle if the animal decided to charge. Bob, perhaps attempting to lighten the mood, declared, "And this, folks, is why you never leave home without the net." The bobcat, apparently unimpressed by the joke, shook itself violently like a dog after a bath, showering its rescuers with icy droplets. It hissed weakly, more from residual fear than aggression, then collapsed, sides heaving. Even in its state of exhaustion, the creature exuded a wild dignity. Its whiskers quivered and its ears flicked at every sound. It was alive for the moment, because 3 humans with a boat and a net had decided to intervene. Minutes ticked by with the kind of slowness that only appears when an unpredictable animal is sitting at one's feet. Steam rose from the bobcat's fur as the sun climbed higher, warming the chill off the lake. Bob rummaged around the cooler and pulled out a spare towel that had been reserved for fish slime. He considered tossing it over the animal like a matador's cape, but thought better of it. Bobby suggested they cover the bobcat's eyes to reduce its stress. Brett nodded, draping the towel over the animal's head with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. Miraculously, the bobcat allowed the fabric to settle, perhaps too tired to protest. Under the makeshift hood, it continued to pant, drawing in precious air. Each labored breath served as a reminder of how close it had been to drowning. Bob whispered soothing words that seemed more for his benefit than the animal's. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured, though the term buddy had never before been applied to a bobcat in his vocabulary. Bobby snapped a photo with her phone, partly to document the event, and partly because she knew that no one back on shore would believe them without proof. Brett, adrenaline still coursing through his veins, felt a growing sense of wonder. A fishing trip had turned into a rescue mission. He glanced at the shoreline, which now seemed both impossibly far and tantalizingly close. They couldn't keep the bobcat on the boat forever, and yet releasing it back into the water was unthinkable. The only solution was obvious, if a bit daunting. Get the animal to land. Brett guided the boat toward the nearest stretch of beach, a sandy point flanked by tall grasses and fallen logs. The engine purred quietly, and the boat cut a gentle path through the water. Bobby kept one eye on the bobcat, and the other scanning for any obstacles lurking beneath the surface. Bob held onto the net handle as if he were escorting a celebrity down a red carpet, ready to shield the rest of the boat from any sudden lunges. During the short journey, the absurdity of the situation crystallized. Here was a group of weekend anglers who had inadvertently become wildlife rehabilitators. Bob speculated aloud about whether they needed to fill out any official paperwork. Do you think Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks has a form for accidental bobcat transportation? He mused. Bobby snorted at the image of a ranger behind a desk rubber stamping such a form. Humor buoyed their spirits and helped mask underlying nerves. The bobcat remained mostly still, occasionally letting out a low growl when the boat hit a small wave. Brett aimed for a patch of shoreline clear enough for them to land without damaging the boat or injuring their passenger. As they approached, A flock of geese took off from the water's edge, honking their disapproval. Brett eased off the throttle and allowed the boat to glide into the shallows with a soft scrape of hull against sand. The moment of transition had arrived. The Herefords exchanged glances that conveyed equal parts excitement and apprehension. No one had ever looked more serious while wearing a life jacket. Stepping onto dry land felt like entering another world. The warmth radiating off the sand contrasted with the cold they had just experienced hovering over the deep lake. Bobby hopped out first, her boots sinking slightly into the muddy shoreline. She held onto the bow rope while Bob and Brett carefully lifted the net containing the bobcat. The animal tensed, sensing the change, and let out a rasping cry that echoed through the trees. Bob whispered another reassurance, his tone more pleading than confident. They maneuvered together, lowering the net onto the sand and stepping back as soon as the bobcat's paws touched earth. For a heartbeat, it remained still, as if unsure whether the ground was a mirage. Then, with a suddenness that made all three humans jump, it shook off the towel, shot out of the net, and bolted toward the tree line with the explosive speed only wild animals possess. Its hind legs propelled it forward like coiled springs. Pine needles rustled as it disappeared into the underbrush, leaving only a trail of damp paw prints and a cloud of kicked-up sand. The Herefords watched in awe and relief as the creature reclaimed its place in the wilderness. Bob blew out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That," he declared, adjusting his hat that had gone askew during the commotion, "is going to be one heck of a story." Brett bent down to pick up the wet towel, half expecting to find it shredded. It was intact, though it now smelled distinctly of wild cat and lake water. The adrenaline rush gave way to shaking hands and giddy laughter. Back on the boat, the mood shifted from tense vigilance to celebratory disbelief. Bobby replayed the phone video she had managed to capture, and the trio laughed at the surreal image of Brett holding a net containing a dripping, agitated bobcat. Bob insisted on describing the rescue using fishing jargon. "We caught and released a real live bobcat," he said, enunciating each word as if savoring them. "Catch of the day," Brett agreed, shaking his head at the absurdity. Bobby pointed out that, technically, the bobcat was the one who had allowed itself to be caught. They debated whether the animal might recount the encounter to its friends as an alien abduction. "There I was, minding my own business, swimming across the lake for reasons that totally make sense to me, when a giant net scooped me up and then humans put a hat over my eyes." Bobby narrated in a deep, dramatic voice, impersonating the bobcat. Brett laughed so hard he nearly spilled the last of his coffee. Amid the humor, there was an undercurrent of wonder. They had witnessed a rare sight, a predator out of its element and vulnerable, given a second chance by unlikely allies. Bob grew thoughtful. "You know," he said, his voice softer, "it's easy to think of predators like bobcats as tough and mean. But everything has limits. Nature's tough, but it's not heartless." Bobby nodded. "And who knew a fishing net could be a rescue tool?" she added. Brett stared out across the water, where ripples now hid any trace of the encounter, and felt an unexpected swell of gratitude. By the time they stowed the net and pushed back out into the lake, the sun had climbed high enough to burn off the last wisps of morning fog. The sky was a brilliant blue, and other boats dotted the water like slow-moving beetles. The Herefords returned to their fishing spot, hearts still racing but hands growing steady as normalcy crept back in. Bob baited his hook, though he did so with less gusto. Brett cast his line into the shimmering expanse and watched the lure disappear, wondering whether any fish would dare bite after the drama that had unfolded. Bobby adjusted her hat and checked her phone signal, just enough bars to post a cryptic status, When your fishing trip turns into a wildlife rescue, only in Montana. Bobcat taxi. Their friends' reactions would have to wait until they were back on shore. Bob tried to segue back into one of his habitual fish tales, but kept getting sidetracked by references to bobcats. Remember that time I almost caught that monster trout? Actually, never mind. This is better, he admitted, surprising no one more than himself. Brett teased his father about needing to add a new entry to his hunting log under feline species, and Bob responded by threatening to make a taxidermy mount of the towel as a souvenir. The humor masked a deeper reflection. They had been given the chance to make a difference, however small. In a world where headlines were filled with stories of environmental destruction and indifference, their tiny rescue felt like a stand against apathy. It was, in its own way, an act of kindness that rippled outward. News travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves wild animals and familiar faces. By the time the Herefords hauled their boat onto the trailer and pulled into the local diner for lunch, whispers of their bobcat adventure had already preceded them. Regulars perched on chrome stools turned to stare. Mugs of coffee paused mid-air. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Lorraine who had served Bob his first cup of joe decades earlier, leaned over the counter and stage whispered, "I heard you folks went fishing and caught something with fur." Bob grinned, relishing his moment in the spotlight. "Sure did," he replied. "Had to throw it back, though. The game warden said our bobcat tags were expired." Laughter erupted. Lorraine swatted his arm with a menu and demanded the full story. Brett recounted the morning's events with a storyteller's flourish, embellishing just enough to heighten suspense without straying from the truth. Bobby passed around her phone so everyone could see the video, and the diner filled with gasps and exclamations. Strangers offered theories about why the bobcat had been so far from shore, chasing a duck, escaping a predator, testing its swimming skills for some feline Ironman competition. An elderly man at the corner table insisted that animals sometimes act strangely before earthquakes, prompting a debate about geology. Amid the speculation, one fact remained. The Herefords had done something extraordinary. They had looked past fear and inconvenience to save a life. Lorraine delivered their lunch, burgers and fries, and told them their coffee was on the house, courtesy of Montana's very own cat whisperers. Over the following weeks, the tale of the bobcat rescue took on a life of its own, morphing and evolving with each retelling. It showed up in the local newspaper under the headline, "Family Net's Unexpected Catch," accompanied by a photo of Brett holding the dripping bobcat like a heroic fisherman. It was mentioned at the town council meeting, prompting a brief discussion about whether there should be signage advising bobcats to avoid deep water. Children in school reenacted the scene on the playground, using jump ropes as nets and awarding themselves imaginary medals for bravery. Even the hardware store hung up a hand-painted sign that read, "We have fishing nets strong enough for bobcats." The Herefords accepted the attention with amused humility. They were invited to speak at the community center's annual potluck, where Bob got up and said, with a straight face, that he had finally landed the biggest catch of his life. The laughter that followed warmed the room. Brett took a more serious turn, using the moment to talk about respecting wildlife and being prepared to help when the opportunity arose. He emphasized that they hadn't been heroes, just people who were in the right place at the right time and made the right choice. Bobby, never one to pass up a teachable moment, printed out information on local wildlife rehabilitation centers and placed them next to the potato salad. Their story inspired others. A teenager came up after the potluck to share that he had begun volunteering at an animal shelter. A retiree donated to a regional wildlife rescue fund. In small ways, the ripples continued. Years later, When the world had moved on to other sensational headlines, the Bobcat incident remained a defining memory for the Hereford family. It became a touchstone, a story pulled out at Thanksgiving dinners and family reunions, retold to new spouses and curious toddlers. Each telling retained its core: a wild animal, a lake, a net, a choice, and gained a new joke or reflection. Bob's hair grew grayer, his hands more calloused, but his eyes still twinkled when he described the moment the Bobcat sprang back to life on the shore. Bobby's marshmallow hat became an heirloom, preserved in a box labeled Bobcat Cap. Brett, who now took his own kids fishing, would point to the middle of Flathead Lake and say, "That's where your grandpa and I caught the most important thing ever." And it wasn't a fish. The children would gasp and beg for the story, listening wide-eyed as their father narrated, occasionally embellishing the Bobcat's size to mythical proportions, like father, like son. Beyond the humor and family lore, the experience instilled a lasting sense of responsibility. It served as a reminder that humans share this planet with creatures whose lives often go unnoticed until they intersect with ours. The Herefords continued to fish, to tell stories, and to laugh, but they also carried in their hearts the knowledge that compassion can turn an ordinary day into an extraordinary one. And somewhere in the dense forests of Montana, perhaps an aging bobcat occasionally paused by the lake, gazed across the water, and, if bobcats could laugh, smiled at the memory of an unexpected ride in a fisherman's boat.